Account takeover, it sounds very complicated, but it's not. It's when you look at account takeover, it's a bad actor, either social engineering or finding a way to get into a customer's online banking. We all have online banking accounts, pay bills from it, do transfers, etc. So what is the key triggers you need? Username, password. And once that bad actor is able to get in, that's your account takeover. They're taking over your account to get money out of the financial institution, out of your account for their own personal gain.
You're listening to Behind Enemy Lines. In each episode, we'll explore advanced fraud fighting strategies with experts battling financial crime every day. Discover what it takes to stay one step ahead of the most sophisticated fraudsters. Ready to sharpen your defenses? Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Behind Enemy Lines. I'm Mike LaFleur and this episode is brought to you by ThreatMark, your ally in the war against fraud. Today our guest is John Fick, Corporate Vice President and Head of Fraud at Northwest Bank. John, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about account takeovers and ID theft, but before we get into that and before we get into the meat of the topic, can you just give everyone who's listening a little bit of your background? I'm always kind of interested in finding out how people got from where they were into fighting digital banking fraud. So if you wouldn't mind doing that.
Not at all. I mean, I've been in the banking industry about 20 years, but kind of what got me in this industry growing up, I love two things: food and law. So it's like, when you're younger, it's like, what do you want to become? I was like, let me try being a chef. That didn't pan out too well. Wasn't my fancy there. And then, took a couple odd jobs, did security for a while. And then, I got into the retail space with investigating like shoplifting, different things of that nature. And then I got my foot in the door just a plain old investigator at a small financial institution in the state of Maryland. And ever since then, I found my home and then just kind of shot straight up throughout my career, changing a couple areas. My bank got bought out by Capital One's, but I spent over about 10 years. Capital One, worked for Ally Financial Bank, then worked for a couple mid-size organizations. And then actually after, several years of investigations, all that, it's like, I want to go into leadership. So, I've been blessed with a great career, able to go into several different banking organizations and really build out their fraud department. And it's something that I've really loved, is to go in and really create something that benefits not only the financial institution, but the communities around it as well. So that's kind of what I've continued here at Northwest, kind of the same process, and been doing, like I said, I've been in this industry 20 years in the fraud department. Do a lot of speaking, I love to talk, as you're going to find out here. So definitely, I still love food though, just not, being the chef component of it. But,
Yeah.
I also have, a master's degree for legal studies out of Northeastern. I got my normal bachelor's, associates, criminal justice and organizational security and management. On the board of a lot of different nonprofit organizations for financial crimes. We need to work as a team. So the more people talk about it, the more people that participate in like these podcasts or different interviews, in my opinion, is critical, because there's just so much information out there that people just don't know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the point that, I'm very humbled that, to do this podcast, to talk about identity theft and account takeover, because of the fact that it's, in this day and age, it's tough.
Yeah. Back to the people needing to work together to solve this problem, we totally agree with that. And I think there's been this change in the way that fraud works recently, or since my career, where, maybe it used to be a lone wolf doing an attack on an institution, and then it went to maybe a loose association of people that are trying to work together. But, it really is organized crime now, and smaller institutions especially face a really daunting task of trying to address that. And the other thing that I've noticed is fighting financial crime is not a competitive advantage for an institution. So you can work with other institutions, you can work with other vendors, you can work with other third parties, because it doesn't impact the bottom line of the bank. It
Right.
improves improves the community, like you said.
It does. The only bad thing is it's still like playing whack-a-mole. It's like every day it's always something.
It is. It is. And we'll get into that, I think, when we go into the discussion a little bit, the ever evolving nature of the attacks.
Yep.
Thanks for that. So let's start with the basics. For those who may not be familiar with account takeover, let's kind of level set. What is account takeover?
Yeah. So, account takeover sounds very complicated, but it's not. When you look at account takeover, it's a bad actor, either social engineering or finding a way to get into a customer's online banking. We all have online banking accounts, pay bills from it, do transfers, etc. So what is the key triggers you need? Username, password. And once that bad actor is able to get in, that's your account takeover. They're taking over your account to get money out of the financial institution, out of your account for their own personal gain.
So when you think about that as an attack vector, how is account takeover different than other types of fraud? Say for example, and I think the whole universe of fraud, not just digital banking fraud, but maybe teller fraud, ATM fraud. How is this different than other attack vectors?
So, it's funny because fraud schemes are the same. Like these fraud schemes that are out there, the romance scams, your pig butchering, the names are everly changing. It's a scheme. So the ATO is just another type of scheme, whether it's check fraud, that's one vector. So that's really not part of an account takeover per se. And at least in our definition here, you have checks that are being written all over the place. That's one type of scheme. Then you have, scheme like a romance scheme. There's just different channels to get the money. That's basically all that the difference is. It's because if you start with check fraud, banks will catch on and put controls in place. So how else do we get money out? I'll just go the account takeover route. Let's try something new. So that's the biggest differentiator when you're looking at these types of, whether it's account takeover, identity theft. But honestly, a lot of them can still work together. Identity theft is going to be a part of an account takeover. ACH fraud, wire fraud, a lot of them you can originate within online banking. So there is a lot of similarities, but at the end of the day, there's just different ways to be able to get money out of the account.
So you just keep saying, you've said it a couple times now, and I think this is interesting. Some people think of fraud as the end game for the fraudsters, right? As if the act of fraud is what they're up to, but you've said it a couple times. It's getting the money out. That is the end game. They have to finance their activities by getting the money out. So this is just one way of myriad ways of getting money out. When
100%.
I think of account takeover, I think it's a direct action of the fraudster because they've stole the credentials. Now they're in the account. They can do whatever they want. One of the guys that works with us calls it the Holy Grail. If you can get in, you can do whatever you want inside that account.
100%. And then, and I'm sure, this will come up later too, but it's like what happens after the fact, because it's all money laundering, that leads into terrorist financing. And, there's reasons why people are doing what they're doing, whether it's for their own self-gain, whether it's as part of an organized crime ring, you name it, there's multiple layers behind it. But, when you're talking about these specifics, to your point, if you can get into an online banking, oh, you're good as gold.
Yeah, for sure. So in continue with that theme just a little bit. How common do you think account takeover is right now? We'll say predictions for later, but like right now, what do you see the landscape in account takeover?
I think account takeovers are extremely popular these days due to, a lot of technology that's out there today, and I'm sure we'll talk about AI more in depth later. But, with technology coming into play, it makes these bad actors' life easier. Why go and steal from somebody? Why go dumpster dive for information? There's no need. 22% of adults have been victims of ATO. They typically lose about $180 per incident, and about 40% of them actually experience identity theft. So in 2023 alone, ATO fraud resulted in nearly $13 billion in losses. And that number is changing year over year and increases. So I fully expect the account takeover probably will continue, will escalate, especially with the addition of, AI And we're seeing, especially in the United States, poor privacy laws that really have no bearing, and there's data breaches all over the place. So it's going to continue in combination with ID theft and account takeovers for sure.
So that statistic about the volume of losses, was that North America or was that global?
That was North America,
Okay.
specifically.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. So just think how, if you apply that globally, you probably
There's
could, if you include Asia and Europe and South America, you could probably get close to 100 billion in
easy.
losses, I'm sure. Yeah.
And there's, there's better protection laws too, over across the pond as well in a lot of those areas, a lot better than here in the United States. So I don't know what that number is offline, but I'm curious. That'd be a good kind of marker to really see how well, how North America's working compared to, other parts of the country. But I got a funny feeling, even globally, it's still going to be high.
Yeah.
Maybe not as high depending on, the location.
We should put context around that too. That is just account takeover.
Period.
When you add in social engineering, and in North America, check fraud doesn't seem to be a big thing like in Europe, or it's not a big thing in Europe.
Right.
If you add those in, just the fraud, the scope of the fraud problem is just enormous.
Oh, yeah. I mean, check fraud's one of your top tiers also, with the ATO piece. They kind of go hand in hand, to be honest, with the account takeover piece. And we'll get into those predictions because I have some thoughts on that, moving forward as well.
So sticking, pulling back to, you said something about technologies and techniques. So let's pull that thread just a little bit. What are some of the ways that fraudsters, because you said the two things that you really need, user ID and password, and you have to know where the bank is, but you get that information. How do they get that?
Yep. So there's a couple ways, first, social engineering, which we've all heard the term social engineering, and it's just basically how good are you acting as somebody else, trying to convince somebody that you're that person, and what information can you derive out of them? And that's where the identity theft part comes in, because you don't have to know the full identity. You just need to know certain bits and pieces that make it appear that you know what you're doing. So that's one avenue. And call centers get hit with that on a regular basis, not just financial institutions, but any company. If you're looking to anywhere there's a financial nexus, you have to be on guard of social engineering. Separately, I'm going to say impersonation scams, which can be similar to social engineering, but obviously a little bit different, because a lot of times today, what we're seeing with impersonation type of scams is you're spoofing, your digital injects, the spoofing is crazy right now. And then like the ransomware. But, I've seen situations where we have bad actors spoofing banks' phone numbers and acting as the fraud department. Well, if the customer thinks, hey, this is my bank phone number, I want to give them whatever they want, even though banks will never ask you blank. A lot of people are creatures of habit. Everybody's vulnerable. You're not thinking, because if you're like, oh God, something's wrong with my finances, a lot of times we overindulge and overprovide. So definitely, that's a big issue. And then to go along with both of those is data breaching. I mean, every day it's like, especially in the United States, is all over the place. You got T-Mobiles, you have AT&T, healthcare systems, everything under the sun. Like, I know my information's out there. I've had bank accounts opened up with all my correct information. So, it's terrifying, to be honest.
Yeah. One of those data breaches that just happened recently was just about 1/4 of the population's data got exposed. Right? So pretty scary stuff. One of the things that you said that kind of struck me was that scams and social engineering and check fraud kind of go hand in hand with account takeover. What you're describing, we've been talking about internally at ThreatMark, is kind of a hybrid attack, because there used to be clear delineation. If it was an account takeover, they had pilfered the credentials somehow, and then they just went in, maybe it's brute force too, but they had pilfered the credentials somehow and they were gaining access. But what you described is this evolution of hybrid attacks where it's multi-pronged. the end goal is the same, to take over the account and then get the money out, but
Right.
they're using more than one vector in order to get it. And we've
Yep.
taken to call that sort of a hybrid attacks.
That makes sense.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, 100% because, social media is crazy today. I mean, look at Telegram, for existence. Okay, you can do the account takeover, the identity theft. So we'll get the customer's money, but hey, bad actor, how about I charge you $50 and I'll give you some stuff so you can go get rich. So everybody's getting rich. Bad actors are getting paid from other fraudsters, are getting paid from legitimate accounts. It's like a huge business.
It is business. And that's another thing that I don't think, well, I personally think it's changed, in over the course of my career. And to that point, was there a moment that you realized that these attacks were turning into this sort of hybrid, or have you always seen it this way?
I've never, it's funny going back to when I first started like 20 years ago today. Back then, there's a lot of like dumpster diving and more localized kind of fraud. Internet was kind of new, just coming out. Technology really wasn't there. People didn't know much about it. So it was more stealing out of the mail, which is still going on today. So, it's different than the dumpster dive today. You don't need to do that. So it has definitely changed over the years. Never really thought about it from a hybrid approach till more later in my career, just because it's like playing whack-a-mole. It's okay. These people got this set. This bank knows what they're doing. Okay, let's go try something else. Look at EMV chips. That was the biggest before they came into play. That was the biggest issue. Check fraud actually went down during that time, but then they put EVs in. Debit card is now changing. I mean, it's still a lot of fraud, but now check fraud creeping back up because it was easier. It's easier to do check fraud than it is to imitate that EV chip card.
I mean, what you're talking about, you keep saying whack-a-mole, and I think anybody who's in this industry will use that
Oh yeah,
term. That's kind of a industry standard jargon now. But
right.
what that points to is two things in my view. One is the willingness of the fraudsters to change their approach based on the protections that the institutions put in place. So that's part of it. They're willing to change, and they're looking for ways to exploit what they see as weaknesses. The other part of it is the willingness of financial institutions to find different ways of stopping attacks, right?
Mhm.
So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, particularly in account takeover, what are some of the techniques that you've used in the past,
Mhm.
and maybe things that you're looking at going into the future?
Yeah, banking it's a challenging situation because we're not just battling fraudsters. At the end of the day, banking is a business. It's customer centric. So the days today, fraud individual like myself, we have to think about that customer experience. We don't want to put too much friction in because then, what we're here to do is going to have an issue. So every bank is totally different when they look at this type of stuff. And obviously, depending on the size of the organization, how much fraud they're seeing, basically, what is the ROI to do something, or is it the cost of doing business? Because I mean, at the end of the day, there's cost of doing business with fraud. We're going to take losses. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But it all depends on the level of it. So, a lot of different financial institutions that I've been at, that's why banks offer like a positive pay solution. That can help cut down some of the fraud that's been around for God knows how long. Now we're worried about these account takeovers, this whole cyber world that's out there that, we're all figuring out and trying to get in. Before there's a lot of rules based, which was great during the time, but now it's not. There's ways that computers can do stuff and it's not going to trigger rules. It's all about people are creatures of habit, as I said before. So the biggest thing in my book today is to really try to, stop a lot of this is to have a machine learning / biometrics type of solution technology in place because these bad actors don't know these customers. So they can't mimic habits. We all have habits, how I type, how I move the mouse, how, if I use copy and paste, if I don't, et cetera. But a lot of these, new technology that I've seen that I really am fond of, just for the mere fact it can catch stuff that we never could catch before, is the biometrics related, the mouse movements. I see some really, really wild things. And then also to treat that as more of an automatic stoppage of the session. Because, all day long, if we can see that they're in there, great. What's that going to do? We have to be able to stop it immediately. And that's the problem with fraud. A lot of manual reviews, which ain't going to do nothing, or we stop it. It's too late. Customer calls in after the fact. So, there's Band-Aids that a lot of banks use, but at the end of the day, there's technology that's growing that really needs to be the focus from a biometrics machine learning standpoint.
So obviously coming from ThreatMark, we would totally agree with you, right? Behavioral intelligence, recognizing those patterns that a legitimate customer has is one of the ways to protect them from account takeovers. One of the interesting things is that Europe has had instant payments for 8 or 9 years now. And the United States is just rolling it out now. And people are taking a wait and see sort of attitude because there's no way to claw it back after it's sent out instantly. So some of the ways that people used to prevent fraud, like putting a payment into a manual queue where the payments department would release it at once they did their checks, that can't be done in a real-time environment. So the ability to stop it, like you said, is crucial as well. One of the trends. Oh, go ahead.
No, real quick, thinking about that standpoint, because it's always interesting to your point, like the real-time payment has been going overseas, and we're like, that stuff scares me. And that's just because, we don't have that today, nor, the technology is growing over in the United States, but the US is always the last to make the major changes. And that's one of the problems, is we kind of need to lead that versus following that approach. And I think, we would have better success in that standpoint. And that's honestly why I'm here talking to you, because we really need to really identify this.
The thing is that instant payments are going to happen. They can delay it, for a while, but eventually financial institutions, competitors going to offer it. It's going to be so attractive that they're going to gain new customers because of it. And then you have to adopt it. So, we're just waiting for the first, set to really make it successful. Then we're going to see the change. So, people like you are thinking about it before it happens and trying to get stuff in place before that change happens.
Well, not even just that. Today, our congressional leaders are talking, and, they're trying to kind of mimic what the UK don't let, a lot of those laws in place where banks are going to take a heck of a lot more losses if they get their way with it, regardless of what I think. Lobbying can always be done, whether or not it's successful or not. But no, we're going down this approach, and I don't see it changing at any point. So between, to your point, competitor using it, oh God, we got to do it because our customers are going to want it. In addition, oh my God, there's going to be new regulatory laws in place that it's not going to make it matter either way. It's just got to do it.
So it's kind of nice to have Europe and the UK already having gone through this, right? They've already gone through instant payment implementation. Now the UK has already implemented a liability shift, meaning the liability falls on the financial institutions rather than the victim. So we're seeing that, and we can make decisions in the United States based on what's happened over there. But to your point, that both of those things it's inevitable. The inevitability is already there.
And that's why education is critical. Because, I can't control what a person's going to do, what they're going to fall for. So is it truly the bank's fault? No, it's not. There's really no accountability to that standpoint. But the problem is it's so rampant. It's causing, an economic hardship and different things of that nature. So I get it. But at the end of the day, we need to really take charge and do this for our customers.
So we've hinted at things that are inevitable and things that are going to change. Let's switch gears just a little bit and sort of look towards 2025. You've already talked about hybrid attacks and the evolution of those, and that trend will likely continue. Are there any new technologies that you're seeing that the fraudsters are using in order to facilitate their either the identity theft or the account takeovers?
Yeah, I mean, the use of AI, dealing with deep fakes. Not that, at my institution, I haven't really seen too much of it, but we're kind of really targeted approach. But, over the course of my career, knowing how financial institutions are in the peer groups that I'm in and my peers in the industry, it's definitely becoming a problem. You're dealing like a business email compromise. It's kind of a very similar approach. And before we could rely on looking at emails that have grammar issues and specific words, but you start using like ChatGPT or AI to write out a message that's going to mimic, you know, one of the employees, it's getting better. So we have to like think of other ways to be able to capture this. On the flip side, do we really want to call every single customer on every single transaction? So, and that's where, fraudsters using technology. We need to use technology to combat that at the same time. Ransomware, as you know, that's kind of an account takeover right there all on itself. We're taking control of your stuff and you're not going to get it back until you pay me X number of dollars through Bitcoin. That's another technology that's really, having an impact on financial crimes. I don't look at Bitcoin in my professional job, I don't look at I look at Bitcoin as very sketchy. Personal level, obviously a little bit different. How do you tell the difference? So it's like using a lot of this new way of currency, using this new way of using AI to do all the dirty work for you, makes life so much easier for these bad actors, but makes it a heck of a lot harder for financial institutions and our customers to really see the difference.
The thing about ChatGPT or AI in general is the rapidity that it is evolving. Like it was about this time last year where ChatGPT first came on the scene, but you can't really have a conversation about anything technology wise without mentioning large language models or deep fakes or ChatGPT or some of the other ones that are out there. And I just find this really sort of not concerning, but the speed at which
Oh yeah.
AI has changed, and then how that's going to impact the speed at which the fraud vectors are going to change as well.
hmm Including check fraud. I mean, AI can do anything. You know, it can, instead of like a bad actor acting like catch me if you can with the little tweezers, making things look and yeah, man, we're just plug and play, spits out 50 checks at once. They look damn good and out the door at the speed of lightning. And we're already in an economic, concern anyway. I mean, anytime inflation rises, anything of that nature, we have a huge population of, elderly individuals that are extremely vulnerable for many different ways, whether it's through like a romance kind of component because their significant other passed and they, the loneliness. The hardest person, let's talk like a Marine, we think a Marine is strong. They have vulnerable points. We're all human beings. So it's like you could say one thing, but anything can happen, even if you're told 50,000 times about it.
Yeah, for sure. I do know a story about a World War II vet. I don't think he stormed the beach in Normandy, but he was in Europe and he fell victim. He's in his late 80s, early 90s, and he fell victim and was ready to give away $18,000. But someone at Walgreens, by the way, recognized that he was trying to buy the cards and they stopped him. But you're right. Everybody has a vulnerability somewhere that can be exploited. And the fraudsters are good at it. The AI is going to help them fine tune their message based on who their target is. It's just really interesting times.
It definitely is. And job security for me, it's not the type of job security that I want because, I mean, at the end of the day, my team, who is a head of fraud, we're trying to, help our customers. And I don't like those stories, of customers working their entire careers and then losing their life savings. And, that's what keeps me up at night is thinking about, individuals who lose their funds. I work at a financial institution. I'm not a Elon Musk type of money person, far from that. And, I imagine it to myself. I mean, I get the scams as well. They don't discourage you,
Yeah.
so it definitely can be heart wrenching, but also, helping is satisfying as well, because you save one person, they tell their story, it can help somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So this sounds like a good way to transition out. We're hitting up against time, but I
Mhm.
think, the conversation has turned to an interesting point. I mean, you kind of talked about the real reason that you're in this, right? It's not just a career. It's not just a job that you have at the bank. It's actually helping people. And, we totally agree with that sentiment. I do. Uh, what advice would you give, let's say, other fraud fighting practitioners, other people at financial institutions? What advice would you give to them right now?
Yeah, one of the, long time ago, one of my mentors specifically told me, be successful, especially in this realm in financial crimes, is really understand the bank systems, how data flows, how the money flows. Because if you don't really know any of that, how are you going to put controls in place to really stop it? Banking systems are very unique per se. There's a lot of, we still operate like we're 1980s, with a lot of systems. It's just, it is what it is, because it's like a huge effort to come new. So one of my biggest things for, especially for bank individuals that are in my realm, whether they're in fraud, whether they're in a frontline staff, wherever, is understand those data flows, because then you're going to be able to identify gaps and have the ability to plug them, understand, and it'll help you understand where technology can really assist in these fraud fighting measures.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So as we start to wrap up, I'm going to give you a chance to say one last piece of advice. If someone walks away from this recording and they remember one thing, what would you hope that to be?
Yeah, vulnerable to these types of attacks. You know, it's the biggest thing is anybody else. I don't even say fall victim to it, because in all reality, they can do it without us even knowing that you're a target. So educate yourself, protect yourself. Don't just look at your bank statements once a month. You know, be on top of your financial assets unless you want to lose it.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, it's
good
the biggest.
advice.
It's very blunt, I know, but it's the only way.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great advice. So we're just about out of time. If people want to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, no, we got two different ways. I'm on LinkedIn. So please, look up John Fick on LinkedIn. You'll see me as John Fick with my credentials as MLS, CFE, CFCI, CECF, CECFE. I'll pop right up. I'm very active on LinkedIn. But secondly, also, you also can get to me on LinkedIn through my webpage. So www.johnfick.info. It has all my contact information on there. My LinkedIn, you can click, get to me straight there. But one thing too, go check out my website. I have a fraud resources tab that is an educational page. You can learn about anything and everything, fraud, information security, how to protect yourself, resources, etc., at your fingertips. So please check it out. There's a lot of great information. I love talking fraud, love talking shop. So please don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn. My email is also on my website. More the merrier. I definitely, like I said, I enjoy this and I love talking to like-minded individuals, where if I can help somebody as well.
Terrific. Well, thanks for joining us today. It was nice having you on Behind Enemy Lines, and I'm sure our paths will cross again, and we'll talk
Oh,
to each
yes.
other again.
No, I appreciate this. This was a lot of fun. Obviously, I could talk for hours.
Yeah,
But definitely look forward to get this information out to those listeners, and, hopefully it sparks some interest, and let's start protecting each other.
sounds good. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Behind Enemy Lines. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts so you never miss a conversation on fighting fraud. We'll see you on the next one.